Welcome to the latest Mosaic Minute, where we talk about issues and challenges and opportunities to drive growth for your company. I'm Ben Scanlon, and I'm with
Neeti Patel.
All right, cool. Again, welcome. And today we're going to be talking about creating your growth vision. But before we get started, Neeti, you shared some interesting content earlier today, which I just want to chat briefly about. I think the quote is, the worst thing you can say to your boss is we failed and I don't know why. But a close second is we succeeded and I don't know why. And that was Joe Chernoff who tweeted that. And why did that speak to you?
Well, before we start, I have a disclaimer to make. So when I agreed to do this podcast or video last week,
yes,
we're getting our kitchen remodeled. As you know, things were quiet around here. And in the last couple of days, it has now gotten very loud. And for anyone who's done construction in their house, it's like a new surprise every day. So if you hear banging, I'm okay. It's the construction that's going on.
Can't hear anything yet. I can't hear anything yet, but that's just the way it works, of course.
Yeah. So that quote really spoke to me because it's something that we always say to our clients, especially those that are kind of preparing for a board meeting, may not have the results that they intended to have or wanted to have. But we always tell them, as long as you can explain the why behind what you're saying, I think that's really where the valuable insight comes from. And so I think the quote, which says, if you fail, obviously you want to kind of think about why it is that what you thought would work didn't, and potentially even what you could change the next time so that you can improve your outcomes. But I also like the second part of it is, you know, if you succeed and you don't know why, that is also an issue, because one thing that we always say is once you find something that works, you need to keep doing it and do it well. And so if you don't exactly know what it was that worked, then you can't actually scale that thing and continue to do it even better and better, and potentially more if it's something that scales well. So I love the quote. He always has good quotes, but that one was one that spoke out to me this morning.
I mean, is there anything more awkward than being in a board meeting and someone reports on results and they say, why did this happen? And it's just like they're stuttering or silence. It's just like you feel so painful for that person.
I know. And I would say this also, you might not know why, right? Like you may not have the answer at that board meeting or when your executive asks you. But the other piece of advice that I give or would want to give is have a plan. Even if you don't know why, say, I don't know why, but here are the next 3 things that I'm going to do to try to figure out why. I'm going to look at this report. I'm going to talk to this team. I'm going to really learn what's happening in this process. I'm going to call this customer. There's so many ways that you can learn about why things work or why they don't. And so even if you don't have an answer, have a plan to find out why. And I think that, you know, for those instances where you have like the crickets after someone asks why something's happening, to just be able to explain, you know, what you plan to do next is a really good kind of second answer.
All right. Well, everyone should be glad they joined in on this meeting to avoid that situation at any future board meetings, because it is quite painful. I think we've witnessed that a number of times. So definitely. And it's just good advice. I mean, it's not just about board meetings, but it's just about reporting out, period. And just to have that fundamental understanding is just so important. So
right. And the last thing you want to happen, but the last thing you want to happen, which becomes even more painful, is having the board in real time look at raw data and try to figure out why. Because those discussions really are not productive and go down rabbit holes quickly. And so
that's an interesting thing. We should talk about that later. Like, what's the right level of data to provide? Because I do think you can get too little data, then people just feel like you're not telling the complete story. Too much data is just like a rabbit hole, like you mentioned. And it'd be an interesting future topic to say, well, how do you know you have the right level of data?
Yeah. I mean, we'll definitely talk about it, but I think that the punchline there is know your audience.
Right.
We've definitely worked with investors that love to get into the detail, love the raw data, really want to know, what's happening at the ground level. And then we've worked with investors and executives that are like, just give me the punchline. I don't need to see all of this. So I would say that rings true in many instances in life. And it definitely rings true here when you're talking about presenting data to a board or a group of high-level executives.
It's a good, actually it's interesting. You make me think, like, in dealing with different board members or different executives at these meetings, it's like, it's kind of interesting to see, like, related to that quote, like, what's their thought process? Like, how do they come to their conclusion? So, like, they want to know how you're coming to your conclusions or how you're going to fix it. I always think it's interesting because that's the benefit of the board meeting, is you have like so many different perspectives on like on a similar piece of data. I feel like you can learn a lot quickly from that. So, but today we're talking about an article we wrote, which was creating a growth vision, which I think is near and dear to both of our hearts. So everyone talks about a growth vision. I mean, you hear about visions all the time, not so much a growth vision, but everyone has like a piece of content on creating a vision or why a vision is important. I would say people have different ideas of what a vision is. But I think you're talking about something a little bit different here. What is the growth vision? Why is it different than how a lot of people talk about it?
Yeah, I think a growth vision is a specific flavor of vision. So vision, I think of, I want to, if you're a travel company, I want to deliver the love of travel, globally to everyone I can reach. A growth vision, though, is more about how you are going to grow. And specifically, what does successful growth look like? How are you going to measure successful growth? And how are you going to achieve that successful growth? And I think it becomes interesting with a lot of the companies that we work with that are on the cusp of this transformational growth. They just receive investment because a lot of them have many different paths to grow. I mean, you could, for instance, invest in product development or kind of create a new product, tap into a new market. You can change your marketing strategy. You can grow your sales team. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can grow, and you can't do everything at once because then you're not going to do any of one of those things,
right,
well enough. And so I think really defining here's, in the next 3 to 5 years, here's how we're going to grow. Yes, we can grow, all these other ways, which maybe one day we will get to, but here's really where we're going to achieve the success that we've outlined in these 3 ways. And I think for a lot of teams, it's one of those things where everyone's like, oh, we're all on the same page. We don't need to articulate that. Right. We understand the opportunity. We're super excited and let's just get going. But I think it is really interesting to take a step back and force that conversation to happen, because I think 9 times out of 10, there will be some level of disagreement as to priorities and the path to growth.
Right, totally. I mean, of our clients, and actually I should say, before this meeting, I said to Neethi that I use the time and time again too much, so I'm not going to say that. But of our clients, how often do you think it's not that organic to have a growth vision? Like, of our clients, how many have had a growth vision, even sort of informally?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone believes they have a growth vision, because of the pitch decks and the investor analysis and, the investment thesis, and you see all these numbers and you see, what your TAM looks like, and you see all of the untapped opportunities you have within your business to drive growth. And so everyone's like, yeah, we've all seen the presentations. We know, let's get this done. But it's really fascinating to think about what's in those decks versus the reality of driving growth. And I think translating kind of that investment thesis into actionable plan and actionable strategy that's measurable as well is not common. I don't think a lot of teams take the time to do that. They kind of take, what have been discussed during diligence and during the, the deal process and run with that. And I know that eventually it'll catch up to you, and just taking that time up front to align around a growth vision, even if you think everybody's on the same page, is really valuable.
Right. Yeah, totally. And I think that the nuance here is important between just the broad vision, which a lot of people talk about, and there's a sort of underpinning for driving your company forward more broadly, as opposed to the growth vision, because it is important to have both, really, and to understand how they play together. What you brought up something interesting, which is just how do you start like surfacing these differences? Is there a certain process you think companies should go through to understand like where these differences are and how they can get to their growth vision?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good old fashioned like workshopping session where you all kind of sit down and you, whether it's before you sit down or while you're sitting down, answer some really basic questions around what does success look like? What do you consider successful? 3 years from now, what needs to hold true for that to happen? So what, either in the macro world or within your organization needs to kind of be true in order for you to achieve that. And how are you going to do it in terms of your strategy, and how you're going to measure it in terms of your KPIs and your metrics. And then you share answers and you start to really identify where there seems to be some misalignment or disagreement. And then working through that, and not just working through it until the hour's over, the day's over, but really working through it until you feel like your executive team is bought into the same growth vision, and all components of it, because they're going to be the ones that then go and cascade that vision within your organization. And if there's any misalignment at the top, it just gets amplified as it kind of travels through the organization. So we've led this for a lot of executives, and I know a lot of them go into it thinking, oh gosh, I could be doing 10 other things right now. This is not a good use of my time. But almost always come out of it thinking, wow, we really needed that.
I think this talks about the idea that growth is more, I mean, it feels like it's maybe a marketing thing or sales and marketing, but it's much more than that. It's a company-wide initiative. If you really want to drive transformative growth, you can't just say growth resides in sales and marketing. You have to figure out like what product can do, or customer experience, or just across the board, to get finance on board, get everyone to understand like growth is important. We're going to make this happen. And it can't just be siloed, or you just won't get to that level of transformative growth that you're looking for, that you're expected to drive, especially if you're a post-investment company.
Yeah, I mean, think about how many times we've been in this situation where we are meeting with the go-to-market team and we have determined our priorities in terms of driving growth. And then when it comes time to engage the development team, all of a sudden, whatever we have requested falls to like the very bottom of the list. And the development team comes back and says, well, that's not our priority, right? We have our own goals and we have our own things that we're trying to drive. And at that point, then your hands are tied. You can't, you and I can't be developers, and most marketing and sales people can't either. And so now you're in a situation where you've made all this progress. You have a really good idea. You have a well thought out plan, but you can't execute it because the rest of the organization isn't aligned.
Right. Yeah, completely. So it's really good to surface those differences. But when you look at it, and probably out of this meeting, you're going to realize there's a lot of different ways to drive growth. What's the issue with that? I mean, everyone's going to have an idea of what they can do. But why is that a problem?
I think because to do it well really requires cross-functional teamwork. And if you are kind of working in a silo because you see this opportunity to drive growth in your day-to-day or what you do, and you're working independent of other stakeholders. I think you mentioned marketing working independent of product or customer success. You're not going to have the right feedback loops, and you're not going to have the level of execution and seamless kind of experience for the customer across all these touch points as you would if everyone's kind of working toward the same goal. I mean, I always say it's like, if you're caravanning on a road trip and everyone's trying to get to the same point, and you're going to stop for lunch somewhere, if everyone took a different route to get there, right? Like you're never going to meet up until maybe it's too late or at the end. And you kind of miss the purpose of working together, driving together. So I think that's the problem with multiple paths of growth. I think it's a good thing overall. It's always great to have options. But I think making sure when you are executing and prioritizing to make sure everyone's working on the same thing at the same time is really important.
I like the analogy. What's an analogy, metaphor? I don't know. Whatever the difference is. I like it. I think it's.
It was all right. It was all right.
That was solid. It speaks to me. It really does. So we realize we should have a growth vision. We have disagreement, or probably not even disagreement. It just has been unspoken. We create a workshop. We realize there is disagreement, or people have many different ways of thinking about driving growth. What do we actually do to establish a growth vision?
Well, that is a good question. I mean, other than kind of working through reasoning why one path may be better than another, more kind of ideologically, I think it's really important to start looking at metrics and performance and really understanding what's worked in the past, what might be changing in the future that would, cause whatever's worked before to not work anymore, and really understand from a metrics perspective what path is going to get to growth, not only the largest amount of growth, but in the most efficient, fastest way. And so that takes a combination of understanding financial impact, but also understanding the investment you need to make up front, like your time to market for some of these things. You might have a really great idea around a product enhancement, but it's not going to happen until next year. And so that, in terms of driving fast growth, is not a great path forward versus something that is an immediate tweak you can make to the operational process or the business or kind of your strategy to drive growth. And so I think it's a combination of understanding impact, time to impact, and probably also the talent that you have available,
right? Yep.
Right? And the resources within your organization. Like, what are you good at? And really use that to drive forward what you're going to focus on.
All right. Well, that was a test because you wrote this article, I don't know, maybe a month ago. So I wanted to see if you were going to capture efficient growth, and you did.
Did I?
Yeah.
I should have reread the article.
I was like, is she going to get a fit? I was going to bring it up if you didn't, but I wanted to see if you were, and you did it. So I'm impressed. I'm impressed.
All right.
It takes a lot to impress me. Okay. So we have our growth vision. We're trying to drive efficient growth. We look at the team we have. So now what do we do with this?
I mean, I think it's really important, I think we talked about this before in another episode, but I think it's important to get the rest of the organization kind of aligned around the growth vision. I think there's very few people who are involved really heavily in the deal-making process and really understand the opportunity that is ahead of the company in terms of the investment and growth. And so you have to bring everyone else along with you. You have to bring the marketing manager who maybe hasn't kind of seen the investment thesis, hasn't been a part of any of these deal meetings, and get them excited about growth and get them focused on what success looks like and how we're going to achieve it, and get their feedback on it, right? I mean, it's one thing to share and say, all right, let's go. It's another thing to really get buy-in and make people feel like they were heard and that they are an integral part of this path forward. So I think that piece is really, really important, especially if you're creating a culture where everyone feels like they are an important part of the company and an important part of driving successful growth.
Right. And I would not to be too prescriptive, but I would make sure you get people to positively affirm that they're buying into this. I think one of the things that we've seen is that you come away, and a lot of times these sessions like feel pretty good, like people feel like motivated out of it, but they come out of these sessions and then the next day they show up at work and they go back to what they're doing before, or that it doesn't, ideally this growth vision would make these conversations easier because you're like, oh, this is our growth vision. Like we're all bought into this. And if that's not happening, then I think you have to go back and make sure you get like people to specifically say, yeah, yes, I understand. And even if you have to force them to say, these are the things I'm giving up to do this, then it's just better to have it out there. I think the unstated or our items are the things that can really slow down growth. Ultimately, you don't want to have continuous debates over what's your priority. So you need to make sure not just that you define it, but you get everyone to say, yes, I agree. And these are the trade-offs I need to make if I'm going to put this in place.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you unveil the growth vision and kind of get the organization excited in a town hall or something, big. You have some drinks, you have some food afterwards, everyone's, feeling good. I think you're right. Then the next day you go into the office and there's kind of the momentum is lost,
right.
That was created. And so I do think it really comes back to this idea of like top down. Like everyone is an ambassador of this growth vision. And so you as a manager of a team need to then kind of continue that conversation and say, all right, we heard what, CEO said yesterday, here's how we're going to be successful. Now let's really take a step back and look at what we're working on, where we're spending our time, where we're investing money to see if it's aligned with the way that we're expected to drive growth. And if it's not, you really need to start having the conversation, with your team, with your leaders to say, based on this new path that we're taking forward, here are the 3 things that we've been working on, but don't really kind of align with where we're going. And they're going to fall to the bottom of the list. I think a lot of times teams, and we work very closely with teams that are implementing strategies that we've created, feel like they have to keep doing what they were doing before, as well as now take on this whole new growth goal. And obviously at some point, it's too much for anyone to handle. Nobody has the available bandwidth to do everything. And so I really think it's about taking the message from the top and cascading it down and making sure at every point and every level, there's an understanding and a commitment to the plan and the vision.
Right. And so last question, what sort of team building exercises help facilitate? No, I'm just kidding.
I was like,
do people still do trust falls? I don't know.
No.
Sounds like a episode of The Office.
Yes.
No, we're going to skip. We'll do team building exercises next video.
Okay. All right. You can write the article on that one.
Well, if you saw our previous video, you would see that I had a terrible closeout. And so I don't want to do that again. Thank you for watching this. And we will continue to produce videos related to B2B SaaS businesses and how to drive growth. So thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.
And I have to point out, you did not say time and time again. So
thank you.
It was a success. Right. We're already getting better.
All right, look at that. It was a little more conversation, which was another goal too. So consider this a victory.
All right. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.